that what you wanted? The
That's a
copies?
good group.
Yeah, copies in the back if they want.
Trying to organize these questions.
I call to order the special meeting of the Board of Education for Tuesday, January 22nd, 2013, and present is Mrs. Kennelly, Mr. Convertito, Mr. Liu, Mrs. Gerber, myself, Mr. Dwyer, Mrs. Iacona, Mr. Fatavine, Mr. Kerry, and Mrs. Brand. You can't hear me? Okay. This is a special meeting for discussion of the 2013-2014 budget. It is a discussion among the board, and at special meetings, we do not take public comment, but we welcome the public to listen and take notes. If you'd please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'll remind the board and the public that at the last regular meeting, we talked about going through the budget kind of in order, and that our goal for tonight would be to get through the income section, and I guess they're called series 100, 200, and 300, salaries, benefits, and instructional services, and perhaps we might get into 400 if we're really good and concise in our comments and our answers.
I heard that.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Or you would be welcome to come to the front seats as well. Several questions were posed in advance to Dr. Title, which is always good because it gives him a chance to do the research and be prepared. And what I thought we would do is he would make a presentation on some of the answers to some of the questions on each of the sections, starting with income. And then we would go around to the board and ask questions. I'll ask questions in the order that people raise hands. From time to time, some board members might have a couple of dozen questions they want to ask, and if they hold forth for all 24, other board members wonder when their turn is going to be. So I would ask each of you to kind of be respectful of how much time you're consuming and perhaps defer to another board member, and then we'll loop back around and get back to each board member so that by the end of the night, everybody will have participated. I'm going to aim at about 9:30 to see where we are, take a temperature check. I think I'd like to get out of here by 10 o'clock, no later than that. But of course, if the board members wish to continue, then we will continue. Having said that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Title for his presentation on the income side of the budget, which is the early pages.
Okay, thank you. There were actually only a couple of questions related to income that came in advance, so this will be brief. One question had to do with what buckets potential sequestration would impact and the dollar amounts we could lose. I would draw your attention to pages 6 and 7 of the document, and I can point those out. And potentially related to this is, are there other risks of reduction in other non-taxpayer funded income, particularly at the state level? So I think I can handle both of those at the same time. If you see on page 6 at the top, we've divided this into revenue to the town and revenue to the Board of Education. So the revenue to the town, the biggest item, the biggest risk item there is the education cost-sharing grant. That's revenue to the town. It's approximately $3.6 million. Previously, this has been held harmless through all of the downturn. The state did use ARA money to prop that up, and when the ARA money went away, they went back and they restored it. this time, I don't hear the same language from the governor and his staff about keeping that at the same rate. So that would be a risk. That's on the town side. You don't know what the risk might be until the governor comes out with his budget, which will be on February 6th or thereabouts. The other one that's big from the state, if you just keep moving down into the revenue for the Board of Education, the one that's probably the biggest one for us is special education excess cost provision. That has been running at about 75% of what the real number should be if the formula were followed, and we've budgeted for 75% for next year as well. There is a bit of a risk there that the state could reduce the money, the total pot of money in the excess cost provision. But by having, essentially flat revenue there, if our special education costs go up more than that, then we have to eat the difference. So I think that one, haven't heard a lot of talk about that one, but that's out there, and that would be, that would be a blow. The ones that are federal, which is the next block, the ones that would be the biggest impact would be for sequestration is the IDEA grants. That's special education, Part B and the Part B preschool, as well as Title I, Title II, Title III, and Perkins. That whole clump right there that adds up to 2.585,937. That income there. Sequestration's been estimated at anywhere from 10 to 15%. And so you'd be looking at anywhere from $250 to $350,000 revenue loss if the fiscal cliff were fully enacted. As you can see, we've budgeted those flat, so we're being optimistic that they won't get reduced, but there is some risk there. And that's really, those are really the ones that I think have the biggest risk right now on the revenue side. Fairfield is perceived in the state as being affluent, and there's been a move to revise the education cost-sharing formula. There's a new commission studying it for at least the 5th time in my professional career. The previous 4 have not resulted in any changes. However, this commission redid the formula and ran some numbers and substantially increased the excess cost-sharing grant. It's a bit of a pipe dream, but even under that scenario, Fairfield got no additional money. So when they run numbers at the state level, they look at Fairfield and they say, if we're going to put extra money into ECS, it's not coming to you. So even if you go back to what the commission's saying about substantially increasing ECS, it's not coming here. There is no formula out there for what a reduction would look like. Typically, they would just take a across-the-board cut, some percentage. Everyone takes a 5% cut in ECS, and that's kind of how it would play out. So that's pretty much my response to the questions that came in on income. So I think at this point, if I didn't answer anyone's questions or people want to pursue other questions, this would be the time.
Just to follow up on the federal side, the Title I through the IDEA Part B preschool, those all mandated programs that money's going towards?
Well, they're the special education, of course, is a mandated program.
Right.
The Education Jobs Fund is irrelevant. That was a one-shot that we got a couple of years ago. Title I is the money that comes in under No Child Left Behind. Mm-hmm. And the way they've structured the law now, there's really no benefit in turning that money back. So, because all the same requirements apply pretty much. So really, there's nothing in there where there's some burden that if we were to just say, forget it, keep your money, that all of a sudden we would be in better shape financially.
Okay.
Other income-related questions of any general nature? Mrs. Cannelli?
Just a couple questions from 6 and 7. From 6, and I just didn't see it, if open choice brings in $3,000 a student, how do we get up to $188,000?
Because it's a formula and there's a bonus attached to it.
Okay.
If you get over a certain number, then the state gives you a little extra. So that's
I didn't think
what's
this
happened.
translated to that many more students, which is why I was...
It's not, yeah, we're not anticipating any additional students, but there was a revision of that formula a couple years ago to encourage districts to take additional students, and if you're over a certain number, you got a little bonus. But they wait till the end of the year to tell you what the bonus is. So it doesn't amount to a whole lot, but that's why it comes out to a funny number.
Okay. And then with the high school equivalency, the GED mandated, I assume that that comes at zero expense to the town, that when the students from Easton are coming? Is
Well,
that, I mean, is it zero cost to us in terms of that they fully subsidize their own students?
That depends on how many students they send. Easton does pay us money for it, but I don't know what the enrollment is in that, so I don't think it's a lot there.
Well, I knew they weren't paying us a lot. I wasn't sure how many students
Right.
that equated to and what costs that equated to.
Right, yeah. I mean, these are classes that are running anyways, so it's the marginal cost of adding 1 or 2 students. It's not like they're sending us 25, we got to hire another teacher and the whole 9 yards.
Other income questions, Mr. Carey?
Yes, with the chair's indulgence, I put together some information I wanted to share with fellow board members regarding income, which I'll hand out now. Ms. Brown actually, this one. Also put copies in the back for the members of the public, so. Pass those around. Yeah. Essentially, I was struck by our superintendent's opening letter to us. Where in the third sentence he indicated that he developed this budget. In developing the budget, he attempted to balance the needs of our highly regarded school system with the financial capabilities of our town. And one of the things I thought, in terms of framing our discussion over the next couple meetings, that might be beneficial is to have a picture or an understanding of what the impact of our requests are over long periods of time for the school district. And so what I have here is a fairly simple model that I've built that looks at what the impact is to taxpayers. And what I'm hoping we can do is have, at some point during this discussion, a discussion about affordability, or at least looking at that, the affordability of our requests in terms of this request. And to step back for a second, I'm looking at a budget that is very similar to our budget from last year. Our budget impact outside of the health insurance bomb is approximately 0.83%. Unless I hear something dramatic based on what I've looked at so far, I'm probably not going to dislike this budget very much. I'll probably like the same things I liked last year. But there's a bigger picture here that I want to make sure everyone's aware of. If we continue as a town to grow our budgets year over year at 4.5%, there's an impact. That impact over 20 years is take the tax bill you're paying now, and multiply it by almost 2.5%. Over 40 years, multiply it by 5.8%, or multiply it times 5.8 times. So what I've done here, just for the benefit of the board, is I've pushed forward what a 4.5% increase looks like over a 40-year time period. As I mentioned, it's a 224%, I apologize, increase in 20 years, 582% increase in 40 years. Simplify that. And the reason I want to have this discussion, I'm an average taxpayer. I pay my $10,000 a year in taxes. As a parent, this is a great deal for me. I have 4 children, which might be a little unusual. I'm getting a $60,000 benefit for my $10,000 expenditure. And it's an excellent benefit. However, 40 years from now, I'm not prepared to be able to stay in the home that I live in at $58,000 a year in taxes, which quite frankly exceeds my tax and mortgage right now. So one of the things I was hoping we could talk about as a board, and what this model will show you is that I have 4.5% projected moving forward, and I put an alternate in there at 2% just to give you an idea what the difference would look like in terms of impact. I've also included some historical data to show you that over the last 10 years, the town's budget is at a compounded average growth rate of 4.86%, and the Board of Ed's budget is run just under 4.8%. So these numbers aren't unrealistic. One of the things I'd like to know from my fellow board members is where we'd like to be as citizens of this community 20, 30, 40 years from now. Because as much as I think it's very important that we continue to support our district's program, I think we have to put that in that framework. So I'm just throwing this out as a question for an open discussion. I'm really interested in what the other board members' perceptions are. I could certainly share the spreadsheet that I used to build this so you can check it and proof it. I've done that fairly consistently over the last couple of days, and I'm feeling pretty strong about the efficacy of the numbers. So that's my brief presentation. I'd be curious to hear if any other members have any comments on this.
We have 177 pages to get through, but we probably have some time for the philosophical question that Mr. Carey poses in terms of where we're going 20, 40 years from now. Do board members have a comment or two that they would like to make? Mrs. Brand.
Yeah, I appreciate this. We're trying to anticipate what the value, I think, in part is also going to be on the community for education. To that end, I don't know if we can actually envision where we're going to be 40 years from now. And I'm not mocking it. I understand exactly where you're going. What I would like to see moving forward, and again, this really isn't related to this budget, but it does take this budget into account. If we would look moving forward and consider for a future agenda doing a 5-year financial and a 5-year educational plan, so that we start to figure out what our priorities are educationally, what the estimates are, what that's going to look like. We do it with facilities, and to me, this is exactly the kind of thing that we could start to do. There wouldn't be any great surprises. Of course, we always have surprises when we're looking at insurance, but in terms of what in terms of what we're looking at in the needs of the district, the primary focus and purpose that we're sitting here, I think we'd have an agenda moving forward several years out, and I think that would actually be very, very helpful.
Any other comments? Mr. Liu.
Thank you to the chair, through the chair to Mr. Carey. Not to at all put you on the spot, but I too think this is a very relevant question. But I guess since you thought about it and put this together, do you have a point of view? I mean, I'd be interested in hearing.
Well, I think that, and thank you for the question, Mr. Liu. I think that from my perspective, it's a big struggle for me because I see the value of everything that we're doing as a district, and I support that wholeheartedly. I think that it's important that we do that, but then I look across the street at my 9-year-old neighbor who struggles to stay in his home, and where this projects for the parents that are sitting here supporting our budget is an interesting sideline. Will their children be able to live in this town as I was when my parents moved here in 1970? Without living in their homes when they come back from college, by the way. That's one of the things we're not aspiring to. And will they be able to retire here? And if that's one of the aspirations. And so the question is, we have an impact on that. So from my perspective, I put in 2% as a baseline, because over that period of time, you know, I thought that obviously interest compounds slower when you have a lower number, was a better place to level set from, at least as a starting point. But I also recognize that that might not be a place that we could be immediately. So we'd have to look at that. But just because I think that's a good number doesn't mean someone else thinks the number should be higher or lower. And so that's really what I was trying to solicit from the fellow board members. The big picture here, the point I'm trying to make is that our job is to identify the need to the community, and I fully understand that. But we have to make that in some frame of reference. So the frame of reference is the stark reality that if we continue doing the same thing every year, there's going to be a cost here that I think very few people sitting in this room will be able to afford. So my hope is that I could get other people's feeling on this too, to see if they have a similar feeling, and if this is something that's worth pursuing over time.
Follow up, and then Mr. Fattabine.
Yes, thank you. Well, you say very much what I feel as well. My concern would be, to be really fair, is that if we say now we got to hold because we don't know what to do, and we give it to somebody else, is that fair for somebody else's kids? This is just my thought in that, you know, if we're at this crossroads, it's possibly the time is now. I mean, I have children in the school too. I have children very young in the school, so I've got many years ahead of me. And the question I know is, it's out there. You bring it up. It's been in the papers. We hear it from tax groups. We hear it from parents. We hear it from taxpayers, seniors, and the young alike. And that is, how does this hold? How are we going to make the changes to make this community be affordable, as we're right now feeling the pressure? And I guess, as I've been thinking about it, my feeling is to say the time starts now, because if we push it off, we're just not doing our jobs as elected officials to, since we're recognizing there's a problem, to actually deal with the problem.
Mr. Fattabine.
Well, since
And
you're
then,
being,
and then I do have to encourage the board that we do have 177 pages to get through, and that we might want to schedule a time specific after the budget process to engage in this. So where are we going, 5 years or 3 years or wherever? Mr. Fattabine.
all right, I'll try to be quick. Since we're being philosophical here, I guess it's my view, to some degree, is that it's clear that it's going to be difficult to continue with these type of budget increases year after year after year. The 4.5% is difficult, it compounds, but the annual budget's going to go wherever the town wants it to go, I think, and at some point the town may not want it to go there. But the real risk, in my opinion, if we're being philosophical, is going to be the so-called fixed costs, which you have no control when the town decides they don't want to spend all that much, and that is the wages and benefits and the debt service. That's where you're going to get in more trouble in the future. Even when you decide to reduce your budget, you're going to find out you're not going to be able to, because your debt service and your wages and benefits are still going to be there. So anyway, that's, I think, getting more cautious in that respect going forward.
So we'll move on, but if I can, Ms. Iacona wants to have a comment.
I mean, I guess a piece of it's philosophical in the sense of where it's going down the road, but to Mr. Liu's point, we're faced with a really big issue here, and the message I'm hearing all around and now from people at the table is we can't sustain this growth. And I think, to Mrs. Brand's point, we really do need to figure out what the long-term financial plan is, and I think that we need to figure out what type of programming we are going to be able to offer. And I think that there are things that we're going to have to look at and make some difficult decisions, because I don't know that we can continue to maintain the level of service we've been able to provide going forward. I just don't think the money's there anymore. And I think that now is the time that we start to get back to basics. And what might be basic to me might not be basic to somebody else. And, you know, those are things that we need to have discussions about. But when I look at this budget, I think that central office and Dr. Title did an excellent job putting it together. There's a big nut there that was the number, and that was the number. But now we as a board have to really make a decision about what is it that we're going to offer and how are we going to offer it. And our focus needs to be on student achievement, and maybe we need to roll back some other things so that we are really focused on reading, writing, and math.
And my final comment, and then I'll ask for other questions on income for next year, is that looking at the school district cost to educate a child and equating that to the 4 or 8 or whatever number of years that a parent has a child in the school is not the way I happen to look at it. If I take my 2 children and say that the school spent, if I take the average 2.5 children per family, that they received $150,000 benefit, $15,000 a year for, 10 years. If they pay on average $10,000 a year, then they're amortizing that cost over a 15-year period. They're not required to pay it all up front. And I think the second thing is that public education has always been viewed as a general public benefit. So to equate the costs of education only to those families who happen to have children in the school district at the time they have it in the school district, I don't think is the whole picture of the discussion, of the philosophical discussion. So I think it does warrant some further discussion about where we're going and what level of services that the town should expect out of this school system, but it won't be answered here tonight. Questions on income for 2013-2014? Questions on income? I feel like an auctioneer going once, going twice.
And I suspect, because Dr. Tuttle was kind enough to answer my other questions earlier, that this answer is not ready yet, but other issues that we have that might fall outside of our operating budget, such as the example, so the example is this year we had a surprise. The surprise was PCBs at Osborne Hill. And we had to then go to the town board and say, we need money outside of our budget because we could have never anticipated this. That might be something we can anticipate moving forward. We don't reserve for teachers anymore, but we might have to add a few sections if we have a spike in enrollment that we won't know until August. How are we going to communicate the potential risks to the other boards so that they can reserve for them and it's not a surprise, at least for what we can anticipate, if in the middle of next budget season we have to go and ask for $800,000 again?
Well, there's always going to be unknowns, and we're doing a budget now that's going to be expended 6 months to 18 months from now. So stuff happens. And as long as it's contained within a reasonable set of parameters, we can make adjustments to handle it. I am very reluctant and only went to you to ask the town for that additional $820,000 because the number was so big. In fact, in my career, I can't recall maybe one other time having to go back to town bodies for additional appropriation. It's really the last resort. Because, there's things that sometimes go in your favor as you unroll your budget, and there's sometimes the things that don't go in your favor. I think certainly when people think that, well, you've got too much money in here, why don't you put in for, say, more retirements? I know. Well, on the other side, you can see that we're playing it a little risky on the income side. That we might lose some income we're thinking we're getting. We'd have to cover that. So we really would try to do whatever we can to, hold back our spending in some areas and cover it, and not have to go back to the town. I don't think that I want to think that, if we run into, a bad winter or something, and it's, that's something that automatically, because it was unexpected, we have to go back. Because generally there's something that happens positively that offsets it. But when the number is so out there, when you're talking $800,000, it's just impossible to absorb. So I think the expectation would be that as long as the variances are within some tolerable limit, we'll try to handle it. We'll do our best to live within our means, and only in the most extraordinary of circumstances would we go back through the ringer to get the money, because it's not a slam dunk to get it. And I've often found the only other time where I've done this, sometimes towns are reluctant to make that commitment to you as early in the fiscal year as we're asking for it, because they're more likely to say, well, see if you can cover it, come back in May. Well, then it's too late. Then you don't have the time to do it. So I think the best thing to do is to just point out where we are being conservative. We're not putting extra money in just to have extra money in there, and we'll do our best to cover it, but in the case of an extraordinary event, we might have to come back. But it's a last resort, it really is.
Mrs. Brand, then Ms. Iacona.
PCBs are required for the school district to look at, or a building committee to look at, as soon as they start to open a building. It's the same with asbestos and lead. Where, in terms of funding, because we're talking about income, the approach that we take, I think, will have a financial impact. If their report comes back and they anticipate having an enormous presence of PCBs that they think is large, given their testing and their assessment, that's going to take us down one road. However, if they do not have those kind of findings, then we actually may start to talk about pursuing it in a different way. We have a whole list of maintenance and code issues that we still are ongoing in the district. And depending on how we work those, we can incorporate them into building projects, which means that, as we just saw with Osborne Hill, in terms of a funding source, that we get reimbursed for that as opposed to having it directly out of pocket. So it's going to depend on how urgent those needs are, and they may be, I just don't know. But I think that's going to help us. The other thing, that when we look at the size and the magnitude in terms of funding, it starts to be not a maintenance item and part of our operating budget just by the sheer size of it. It falls into a category, to me, that's a capital project anyway. And again, then the funding from that is different. It is the town, it is bonding, but it isn't coming out of the operating. I just don't see that as something that, quite frankly, the scope of it is going to be something that I think our operating budget can really consider. Moving forward, in terms of funding, I think there's some other options out there.
Ms. Iacona?
In terms of income, I wanted to just have some questions answered regarding the building rentals, and I know we got something in our packet. I realize the fee for renting the room goes to the town. But are we looking to raise those fees? Have we considered that? If yes, how much, and if not, why not?
Yes, we're considering raising the fees, but we need to do that in conjunction with the town, because the town's the recipient of the money. As we are going to be considering the custodial fees, one of the things that we're actually going to be looking at on that front is, while the policy of and regulations with respect to fees require organizations to pay up front, that's really not been enforced and is hard to enforce, because sometimes these organizations pay their fees out of the revenue they get for hosting the event. So they don't have a bank to pay you up front. But we also spend an inordinate amount of time chasing down people for money. Money that may be going to the town, not to the Board of Ed. So we're thinking about instituting fee structure starting on July 1st that might give people an incentive to pay up front. If you couldn't pay up front, then you'd pay the regular rate. So it might be the kind of thing where fees and usage fees go up, say 5% or 10%, but if you pay in advance, you get a discount to the regular rate, something along those lines. So those who truly can pay it up front can do it, and would save us some staff time in our office for chasing people down. So, but we need to do this in conjunction with the Selectmen's office, because they are the recipient of the usage fees. We really shouldn't do that unilaterally.
So we would have to have a discussion with them about generating higher fees?
Yes, I think so. I think that would be fair. I don't know that that they have veto power on it, but I think we would want to do that, because let's face it, citizens complain about the high fees, they're going to probably complain to the selectmen, so we probably want to be on board with that.
Through the
So, I mean, we can raise the fees. It's really, I don't think it's the issue that the fees aren't high enough. The issue is, many organizations are exempt from them entirely.
Well, that was going to be my follow-up
So,
to that.
and that's what the chart shows that John had asked for, that we produced. And that's a historical thing, and that's a decision that was made by the prior first selectman. But again, that's town revenue that's being foregone, or forewent, or what is it, Jennifer? Lost, not collected. You know, so to some extent, if the first selectmen, or, you know, want to exempt 2/3 of the groups because they have some connection to the town, or they're housed in, whatever the reason is, I mean, it's their revenue that is being lost.
But can we, how do we,
have
my,
another follow-up?
yeah, I do. How do we have that communication with them to figure out what's exempt, what's non-exempt, and whether or not it's in the best interest of everyone involved to raise fees? How would that work? Do we ask them to come to like the next meeting? I would like to have that discussion if other board members are so inclined. How does that happen?
Point of information, we actually have a facilities usage policy, so I think actually it would come into that.
A comment, and then I'll go to Mr. Convertito. A discussion of this nature started in the policy committee about a year ago. Mr. Cullen put together a very good information about which organizations were exempt, which were not. And so a lot of that information actually exists from which a conversation could be had. And so it's not that the research hasn't been done, it's just a
Right.
question of when that topic gets on the first selectman's agenda of things to deal with. And secondly, the Board of Finance, for the Board of Education's information, have also started looking at their policies relative to line item grants to not-for-profits. So I think the topic is very germane and timely. Mr. Convertito.
Yeah, I just want to follow up, since I was the person who requested the information, and my request was twofold in nature. One, if you're a non-for-profit in town, and you want to rent the Penfield Pavilion, you don't rent it for nothing. You get a discounted fee, okay, on the town side. And the other side was, we have incremental or differential costs when somebody uses the building as far as janitorial expenses and wear and tear that we're not covering when it comes to non-for-profits. And one of the examples are we have non-for-profits running before-school and after-school daycare centers, which we do not, in our schools, which we do not charge janitorial fees for, which are coming out of our budget. And, you know, where I'd like to see this go is just to cover our differential costs. I'm not looking to charge them astronomical amounts of money, but if there needs to be a janitor there till 6 o'clock cleaning that building and cleaning up after those programs, then I think it's only fair that those non-for-profits pay for those services, rather than having come out of the general budget. So I wanted to get some framework from which to begin with, and that's why I requested the information. So I look forward to carrying the conversation forward.
You're our champion on this,
Sure.
or our professional nag?
And I'll, you know, from my end, administratively, you know, I'm happy to sit down with the first selectman and say, you know, did you realize, here's the list, you know, here's all the exemptions, you know.
It's a book.
Right, right. Do you want to, you know, if you want to change it, we'll enforce it and go from there. But I think ultimately the decision about the room usage, since it's revenue to the town, would be a town decision on who they want to exempt.
The custodial fees fall on our bailiwick.
The custodials, yeah, the custodial fee, the non-collected, non-billable custodial fees are, but a lot of that are town agencies, right? I mean, the RTM meets in here, and they're discussing the budget till 1 in the morning. All right, we're paying the custodial overtime. We don't bill the RTM for the overtime. All right, so there's some you probably don't want to charge. But, you know,
A debate on that.
well, that's true, but, and so that's, you know, there are exemptions for different reasons. There's different buckets of groups who are exempt for different reasons.
And just a
Mrs. Tonelli and then Mr. Liu.
very quick follow-up to that. If the town has decided to exempt a particular group, does that necessarily mean they're exempt from the custodial fees?
No, no.
Okay.
They might be exempt from room usage, but they still pay the custodial overtime.
I'm sorry, I didn't, that they do still play custodial overtime? Is that
Yes, yes, you can be exempt from room usage fees and still have to pay the custodial overtime.
Mr. Liu?
But in the example of that, what you just used, the RTM, I mean, maybe it's a good idea that even though that it's allocated under their budget instead of ours. Because if we're paying the custodial fees for the RTM, even though they're part of the town and we're all trying to help each other out, it comes under our books when it should maybe go under the town's books, so we don't look like our budget is going up.
Right, I understand.
Mr. Carey, and then Ms. Iacono.
So this is an interesting topic of discussion, and I would be open, the example Mr. Convertito gave, the daycare centers, to see if we could do something there. I would also want to understand, to the extent that we have any control over this, what the rationale is for some of the exemptions. I'd be less open to trying to exact fees from PTAs for after-school activities, or Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts if they're using the buildings, anything that could be considered an enrichment program. You know, these are the town's buildings that we maintain, and the town provides us with more than 90% of the funding that we utilize for the custodians. So, you know, it's I think something we have to decide mutually. But I do hear what you're saying there, and I would be interested in looking at that, but I want to understand the scope of what we're looking at, because I think that there is some room there.
Mrs. Iacono, and then can we move on, or do you want to have a follow-up?
Well, if the research was already done, can the rest of the board get a copy of what's ever out there? And then is it appropriate now to start making recommendations for changes? Like, I'm not understanding the process of how we get this going. I understand the town side. How do I fix this for the stuff that we're responsible for? Can we get a copy of that materials that the policy committee got? Can we start to have a discussion around that? How's it broken out?
Okay, so it started as a discussion in the policy committee because there is actually a policy on facility usage, and that policy is a one-page policy, but it's accompanied by about a 7 or 8 page administrative regulations where most of the guts are in. Then as way got underway, I think Mr. Convertito had full intention of moving this discussion forward and eventually bringing something to the board, but other issues and things got in the way. So I'm assuming that you're going to continue to push this question.
It started very simply from a point of view of taking a different look at the budget. There's not a lot of opportunities we have to derive revenue.
Right.
Okay, and I'm not looking to charge people, you know, a rental fee above and beyond our cost, but when we're using custodial time and it's coming out of our budget to subsidize another program, I mean, we have the summer camps that run all summer in the schools. We fund those with janitors and trash and refuse services, and it seems to me that you could raise the cost of a summer camp by $10 and cover our costs out of our budget. That's not really an educational cost. So it came from an approach of that. If there's a differential cost for custodial and air conditioning and so forth, then should we take a look at being able to fund those with a user fee type of program? And that's where I would look forward to moving it forward.
So to cap this off so that we can move along, I will ask Dr. Title to have Mr. Cullen, who put the original packet of information together that has about 7 pages of organizations that were made exempt by the First Selectman's Office, and the other documentation that he put together made available to the entire board, all 9 of us, in the event that those members of the policy committee can't lay their hands on it right at the moment, so that you'll all have that information. And then I'm assuming that Mr. Convertito will, you know, distill it all and try and push this forward to what action he thinks or would recommend that the board take.
For this budget?
For this budget would require that to come forward by Tuesday. So I would ask if any individual board member wants to research it and bring an idea forward between now and Tuesday, It's not just Mr. Convertito's ability to do that. Any individual board member could do that.
Right.
But you'd have to bring something forward by Tuesday.
That's my driving point here. I want to know if we can get something done for this budget. And it sounds like, yes, if you give us the materials, then we can make proposals.
If one of the 9 of us decide to move forward on this and bring something that is an actionable item, the answer is yes. Mrs. Kennelly?
It's been a while since I've looked at the wording of that policy. Would this involve also a policy change? I mean, it was a general one, and then it was designated outside of the board for who got those exemptions. So I don't know that it would necessarily involve a policy change, but it's a changing of the designation of these organizations. So,
There's a two-part answer. My opinion is, from my recollection, is that the committee thought that the policy did not need to be changed, and that the question of the exemptions that were made were really an administrative decision at the first selectman's office, and that if you simply presented that as an issue and changed that one item, that could produce additional revenue. If you were to get into some of the other aspects of the administrative regulations, then the process of changing the administrative regulations to have a dual fee, and if you pay in advance this and if not that, that might require action that couldn't be done between now and Tuesday, but we could take action in anticipation of those fee structures becoming effective July 1. And then that would give us time to bring it up to date.
that was my recollection as well. I just wanted to be sure.
We have stuff to move on to.
Yeah,
please.
I actually want to move on, because quite frankly, the revenue we're talking about, even if we're fortunate enough to generate it, goes to the town anyway, so it's not going to have an impact on here. And I actually think it needs to go to policy, so I know we've got a lot, so I'd ask that we move
So
forward.
let's move on to staff salaries, which is the Series 100, and I'll again ask Dr. Title to make some initial comments based on the questions that have come in, knowing that he probably won't be able to answer all of them in a presentation format, and will rely on board members to ask individual questions that he does not touch on. Dr. Title.
I'm glad you gave me that caveat. We did our best, but this came from a lot of different places, so I may have to bounce around with some paperwork here. There was a question about how many employees work for the school district and compare that to last year, and how many of those are teachers as opposed to others. Because we present everything in FTEs. We have 10 fewer people working for us this year compared to last year. 1,473 last year, 1,463 this year, down 10. The number of teachers has gone up. 966 last year, 983 this year, and the non-certified, of course, went way down. You might remember last year we made that big switch in the certified special ed and reduced the number of paraprofessionals, and that explains a large a part of it. The number of clerical support and support staff changing over the last few years. We have the data going back to 11-12. If you go back before that, clerical has gone down over the last few years. Support staff, paraprofessionals, of course, fluctuates, depends on the student population, but has generally gone down, as we know from last year. The clerical support has gone up, because if you recall, this year, we added the 19-and-a-half-hour clerical support positions to the elementary schools, which is turning out to be fortuitous in a number of different ways. So that has gone up. There was a question about the high schools and the estimated number of teachers, and it's different from Ludlow to Ward. When I budget with the headmasters and with Ann Leffert, we try to make an educated guess about which schools have classes with the additional kids coming in will need FTE. But the headmasters know that it's quite possible that what we put in there in one school is not enough, and what we put in the other school might be too much. And we have flopped them back and forth, depending on what the signups look like. So what happens is in April, after we've gotten the tallies in and the headmasters are trying to schedule, they sit down with the curriculum leaders and they say, well, the budget for, say, Fairfield, Ludlow High School, we were supposed to have 15.0 science teachers, but here's how the kids have signed up, and we really need 15.25. And maybe over at Ward, they budgeted for 14.0, but they only need 13.5. And so we will actually move not just new positions around, but existing positions around, depending on what the actual student signups are. So this is a prediction based on our existing class sizes, but the course-taking patterns of students can vary from year to year. And in some cases, and this year is a good example, where we had additional enrollment in some courses, we needed to add positions that we never anticipated. And then in other cases, we might reduce. So we're very flexible about the staffing at the high school, possibly going back and forth between the two schools if necessary, or if we just need somebody because we're going over a limit, we will just add there and take it out of somewhere else. So that's how that's done between the high schools. I don't know. There's a lot of questions about the staffing here, so I think if I talk through all of them, you'll be snoozing shortly, so.
Take questions as he goes along.
Right.
Real quick, because I'm looking at, for the following year, which is what we're budgeting for right now, we're going to have a discrepancy of a larger number of students at Ludlow, and that's, I'm just trying to ascertain we're going to be able to meet those academic needs, because it's
Right.
what, 192 more students to date that we know of. Those are the ones that are already in the system. So that's my concern, is to
Right.
whether or not what we have as a line is going to be adequate.
Right, we think it's sufficient right now, but if we need to change it, we do. So we're flexible with that. We try not to be overly aggressive, and try to be reasonable about it. It so happens this year, interestingly, the ninth grade at Ludlow was actually smaller than the ninth grade at Ward. And that was not anticipated, and next year that will be probably true in 10th grade. So there's some mitigating circumstances at Ludlow that we were not anticipating. Still need more teachers in both places. Just won't be able to sort that out till the course selections are done.
Right. I guess my concern is whether or not we have enough total, and specifically at Ludlow, only because of the difference in the volume.
Right. Okay, on that. There was a question about tech support, and I understand why there's maybe some confusion around that. It looked like we were reducing tech support and so forth. We actually aren't changing the tech support at all in terms of number of people, but the tech support is being centralized now and sent to the schools based on need, particularly at the elementary and the middle schools, so that we moved the tech support people from the schools into a central account. So it looks like we wiped out a lot of tech support positions in the budget. All we did was centralize them because now they serve multiple schools. So there's no change in the level of tech support. We did make one change in the current year. We had a vacancy, and rather than fill the position, we took some tech support people and made them 11-month and 12-month employees, and took the dollars allocated essentially to that one position and spread it out among others, because so much of the work we need to do in the tech area happens over the summer. And we had too many 10-month people, and then you've got this opportunity in the summer to do all the computer updating and the refreshing and so forth, and we don't have enough people. So we are down one position there, but the dollars didn't really change. So the tech support is just a more flexible system. We kind of were pushed into that 2 years ago when we had the cut. If you remember, in that cut in 2011, we did eliminate 5 technicians. We had one at every elementary school. We had to go to a different model where they were being shared. And now they're not only being shared among the elementary schools, but they're also being shared at the middle schools as well. So there's no reduction in tech support at all. We just moved it. There were some questions that came up about why are the costs of staffing at some of the schools going down, but the number of FTEs didn't. And that's because when the budget is built, we take the existing people and move them forward into those positions for the next year. In the event there's a retirement and somebody, say, fills it at a lower position, then we look at them again this year and move them forward. Obviously, that number has gone down. Also, people transfer around from school to school, and that can have an impact on the staff. So you could have the reverse happening in some places where somebody's FTE count isn't changing at all, but it looks like a sizable increase is happening in their budget at the school. And that may have been that somebody left and somebody transferred into it who was a higher rate of pay, and then the reverse happens. So every year we try to, we take the existing people who are really in the positions, and then we move them forward. The one thing that we do when we budget those retirements, and this year, we're budgeting 16 retirements. The way we do it is we don't put it all in one account. We actually go through and select 16 salaries to reduce by $35,000. So depending on which ones we pick, and they may or may not be the people that actually retire, we could be off. So there's going to be this fluctuation when you look at school-by-school costs. So the really important thing to look at is the FTE counts. If you want to know how well we're staffing a school, don't look at the amount of money we're paying teachers in the school. Look at the FTE count affiliated with that school and the FTE count for teachers for operating budget as well as grants, there's a whole section on that. That's often confusing. However, overall, there was not as big an increase, and this gets to another question, good segue, of why the certified staff costs, when the contractual increase back when the contract was negotiated was 2.25%, and yet the increase in staff is 0.7, 0.8 in that range. The further out contracts go in time each year, the less reliable that initial number is. Because when you negotiate a contract, you take a census of people for that fall before the contract goes into effect and say, what would the impact be of a raise or increment on that census of people? And if that census of people changes over the couple of years, what looked like a 2.5% increase or 2.25% increase could be 0.5% either way, depending on retirements, move-ins, moves-outs, who gets an advanced degree, who doesn't, that sort of thing. So that's part of it. Part of it is, this year we had additional retirements above and beyond, I think we had 8 above and beyond what we budgeted. So that rolls over into next year as a benefit. Then we're also assuming 16 retirements for next year instead of the normal 10 or 12. So that reduces it. And then we have some normal kind of turnover. We had some people leave to take administrative positions in other districts who were fairly high up on the pay scale. They weren't retiring, but they got replaced with people, at the low end of the pay scale. And we are overall reducing in the non-certified areas the impact of the budget. The FTE count for non-certifieds is going down. So that's another factor. The certified is pretty much flat, but the non-certified is going down. So we are shifting from primary to secondary, but that's a different issue. Who fills the positions is different from how you budget it. So that's, and then I think Jessica had asked for a grid to show more detail around what makes up the teaching staff FTE, and I think Doreen produced that. Do you have that with you? Okay, why don't you pass that out now? Give me a break, and maybe something you want to just absorb and ask questions about.
She'll put some at the back of the table.
Yeah, I think we've got extras as well back there. This relates to the pages in the budget that show each school's staff. So, for example, on page 93, where it says Burr, and the proposed FTE at Burr next year being 33.90. The question was, can we see a breakout of what that's made up of? In other words, how many are classroom teachers, how many are different sorts? So this is what this is a detail around. This is a backup document we build the budget from. So it's all in there. This does not include grants, but neither does page 93. All right, so in other words, if you look at the document, I think everyone has it now. If you look at Burr, for example, the proposed 33.90 under teaching staff. So if you look at 10 Burr 101 teaching staff, 33.90. If you look on the far left, Burr, third column over, proposed. That column adds to 33.90. And you can see what that is made up of. By grade, by special ed, phys ed, and so forth. And so that's more detail around. And what you have is for all the schools, not just Burr, but you have all of them.
Yeah.
All right, okay. Let me see what else I have under 100 series. Okay, part-time employment substitutes. This is a big, we move money around in here. When a teacher's out for a long period of time, sub-costs that are being assigned to a school get switched over to a long-term sub-account. Then we underfund the long-term sub-account because then there's salary savings for a teacher who goes out on an unpaid leave. So that's kind of what happens there. So the individual schools are going to have huge variations depending on whether the person's out for a long period of time, in which case their dollars are assigned centrally. If there are people out for short periods of time, that gets assigned to the school. So the big thing there is we just have to keep track of the whole account. That's what goes there. Wage and benefit reserve. I will caution you, we don't have a lot of public discussion about this because this has some of the assumptions in here relate to negotiations. But we have a number of unsettled contracts for next year. Some of them go several years now. So this thing keeps growing if we don't have a settlement. And retro payments for previous years are charged back to an accrued salaries account, but we have to build in the anticipated increase for the previous years into the budget base. So this is all unsettled contracts with assumptions for what those might be. And I believe and this is non-certified only. And we did have some money in here for the administrators for the current year, because at the time we did the administrator, at the time we did the budget last year, the administrator contract was settled. However, we did not have the salary schedule agreed to, so we couldn't slot them into individual people. So what you see in the budget is it looks like the administrators, the unionized administrators, got a double raise. They did not get a double raise. What happened was 1 year's worth of raises went from the was budgeted in the wage and benefit reserve, and the other one is in the account. So that's why it looks like, you know, they get a 1.75 contract. It looks like it got 3.5, but it's just because we didn't have the money, we didn't have the wage schedule set up. So generally the wage and benefit reserve is simply for non-settled, non-certified, which in this case is every single union, with the exception of some that go back more than 1 year. So that's why this thing is kind of grown on us. So it is built from scratch every year. Tech support I talked about. I'm going to stop shortly, although Mr. Liu did have some good questions I want to get to. Okay. I think that's that. Okay, on some of the more high-profile positions that there were questions about. So we have curriculum coordinators. This is in the instructional services line. We have part-time coordinators, 2.60, and a .5 district elementary health specialist. That we were asked about. So curriculum coordinators are different from curriculum leaders. So curriculum coordinators are part-time teachers and part-time coordinators. So they coordinate the curriculum review process in these smaller, quote-unquote, smaller content areas. They do review and selection of materials, assessments, communication with the department, program reviews, so that's art, physical education, music, health, world language 4 to 8, world language grades 9 to 12. Those are all coordinators. Some of them are, say, .6. As an example, you might have someone who's a .6 teacher and a .4 coordinator. So that's why that thing ends up being a fraction. And then you've got other people that might be .8 teacher, .2 coordinator. So that's where that comes from. The health position, that's a district-wide position in health, and this person does all the instruction, direct instruction on the sensitive health topics that require a certified health educator to do. So and that person's been doing it for a very long time. And that's part of her assignment. So that's why it's a district-wide position, because this person serves all the elementary schools at half-time position. Sure, go ahead, yeah.
Thank you. So there was another coordinator on page 43 under Pupil Personnel Services, 51170 coordinators at 2.80. And what is that exactly?
Those are the administrators, right, in the special services department, right? The secondary, the elementary, and then the preschool, I would think, would be the three, right, Andrea? Those are administrative positions, full-time administrative positions.
And what are they doing exactly? What?
They're the frontline people for special education, for the elementary. If there's an issue with special education program or special education issue at the elementary level, that person handles it. Same thing for secondary. And then we have the preschool position, who's actually the preschool principal, right? And so they're administrative positions, and their job entails a lot of problem solving around all special education issues at their different levels if they can't be solved at the school level.
And so where are they located necessarily? I mean,
They spend most of their time out in the schools. They nominally
Move
have
around.
offices in the central office, but the preschool person's obviously at the preschool, and the other positions, they have offices here, but I don't think I ever see them.
okay.
What's that? They meet in the evening, right. So they're pretty much out in the field. And there's been a slight reorganization there, because we've actually given the secondary person more responsibility for the alternative high school, which we had not done previously. That really had fallen on Andrea Leonardi, which, to be honest with you, she didn't have the time to do. And so we have the secondary coordinator spending a lot more time with the alternative high school, which I think needs a little bit more attention and perhaps some refreshing there. So that person will spend some time there as well, the secondary individual. Some other ones that came up here, department liaisons, they're sort of related in the same bucket. Department liaisons are full-time teachers, and they get a stipend. So if you remember last year when you had the curriculum come in for tech ed, Chris Samuelson came in, did a presentation. He's a liaison. So he teaches a full load, and he gets paid a stipend that's negotiated, and he does additional work above and beyond when it's their time for curriculum, materials, assessments, departmental coordination, and reviews. So we have family consumer science, grades 6 to 8, family consumer science, grades 9 to 12, tech ed, 7 to 12, business at the high school, library media. We have two of those folks. Elementary social studies and English language learners, K to 12. So they report to the principal of the school they're housed in, But they work directly with the director of elementary or secondary, depending on which level they cover. And in some cases, for example, somebody might cover, well, no, and these are all cover one level. These all cover one level. Some of the coordinators get to report to two people. So those are some of the, I think those are some of the big ones. The clerical support and clerical extras, the clerical support of the part-time clerks, that we added the extra part-time clerk, and the clerical extras are summer work where the secretary can come in to do class lists and summer mailings, and the that's in the budget for clerical extras. That's what that's called. Let me stop there. It's not enough for me. We can
Mr. Liu, and
pursue
then
other
Mr. Eichelon.
questions. Okay.
And many of the questions on what does somebody do and where do they work and what's their responsibility, probably we can't get to every question
Yeah, of
tonight
course.
because then other board members won't have a chance. But Mr. Liu has a couple more that he wants to follow up on.
First, just to follow up, thank you. First, just to follow up on, you had the middle school liaisons, and what's the difference between that and a department liaison under Instructional Services, page 57?
Okay, so the department liaisons we just talked about, right?
You did? I'm sorry, is that different?
Yeah.
Or did you talk, okay, and then...
The
middle
department
school-
liaisons are the full-time teachers
Okay.
who get a stipend.
Okay, so then what about the middle
The
school?
middle school,
Okay.
I guess they used to be known as team leaders, I guess is the best way to put it. I see Gary's out here. He knows this like the back of his hand, Gary Rosado, right? So these are people who are given a stipend, and they're the go-between between the principal and the teams, or the crews, or the communities, whatever we call them. So they are full-time teachers, and each middle school has them, and they're part of the middle school leadership team. So they work after hours. They're part of the data team and the leadership team at the middle school. But they're really the go-between between the principal and the teams, crews. Is that the best way to put it, Gary? Okay. I'm seeing a nod, so I guess I got the basic idea of that one. But there's a lot of them making a relatively small amount of money, but when you put them all in one place, it's a fairly big number. Okay. Yeah.
Want me to-
Ms. Icahn.
I didn't
know if you wanted me
to keep going
with Right. my
questions, or did you...
Do you have, Ms. Icahn has a follow-up on?
No.
Right.
I thought he was done, so whenever you're ready
A
for
couple
me.
more questions, then we'll move on.
Thank you. Page 41, 62, pupil personnel services, social workers.
Right. That was another change.
Okay, so I mean, can you tell me where those social workers,
Right. Yeah, they didn't go anywhere.
well, I don't mean go anywhere, but
Right.
where are they? so
Yeah,
to speak?
so what happened there was the social workers are assigned to the elementary schools based on the need of the school. And so as they get moved around a lot, we, again, decided to centralize the funding for them. But we didn't reduce the social workers. So I think I want Andrea to explain this in more detail because she's the mastermind behind this, if you don't mind.
Great, and Ms. Leonardi, is, just to, before you continue on, I did notice that some of the schools have social workers, and then there's a group at the bottom under the personnel services. Thanks.
What you'll see in this budget is we've basically consolidated all of the social work services to central office. In this year's current budget, for example, if you looked at Holland Hill, Holland Hill shows that they have a .2 social worker in their Board of Ed budget for this year. That's a remnant of a special ed program that used to be housed there. It was called guided learning. It's not been in play for a long, long time. What we decided to do was, rather than keep those little pieces out that are really remnants of programs past, we consolidated all the social work services, and they'll be distributed out centrally to all of the districts. So you see no increase overall in district social work, but you'll see in the buildings decreases, and I believe those three schools are the alternative high school, Jennings, ECC, and 4 schools, and Holland Hill. You'll see little decreases, and then that equal amount of increase in that central office line. So there's no increase at all. It's just really kind of organizing better the FTE so it's seen by the district.
Got it. One more.
Thank you.
40, thank you very much. Page 46, Instructional Services, the Secretarial Services, the Secretarial Services curriculum.
Yep. That's in central office.
Okay.
So we have secretarial support services for Deputy Superintendent, Director of Elementary Education, Director of Secondary Education, and they also service the curriculum leader for language arts and math science for the elementary level. They're at the central office. There's 3 of them there. The curriculum leaders who are housed, the 4 secondary curriculum leaders at Fairfield Ward High School, they have a secretary as well, and that's what that one is for, and they're housed at Ward. And she's the one who would then type the curriculum documents and do the ordering for the curriculum leaders when they need to do that, and answer the phone and so forth. So that's the 4 secretarial services related to curriculum.
And there's all these other ones that are basically the same thing. Can you just
A lot of them
briefly
are central office positions.
These are pretty much all central office.
Yeah, like the secretarial services and pupil personnel are right behind that wall. You've got, in business, you've got secretary clerical, you've got the accounts payable people. That clerical, I think, Doreen, you were researching that exactly, but I mean, that includes accounts payable, health, the benefits people, the payroll people. That's who's in that bucket. And
Is there a way to get a list of, very much like this list that you gave us
Sure.
with the teachers, on some specifics about where they're assigned and what their jobs are?
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, not a problem.
Thank you, Mr. Liu. Ms. Iacona, and then we are in general questions, and raise your hand.
I had a question about substitutes and the costs there. Have we had to change the daily rate that we pay substitutes, or is that flat? How does that?
We're still at the same rate as we have been. Hasn't changed.
And we don't have a hiring issue finding qualified substitutes at that particular rate, do we?
I think there are days when we have trouble with that. I mean, it all depends on the day, right? I mean, if it's a day when we have, say, professional development going on in 2 schools, and then you have a lot of absenteeism for some reason, and a couple hard-to-fill areas crop up, you can have issues with that. You know, we've tried to compensate with that, you know, and use our interns and our what we call permanent substitutes as often as possible. So we know we have a baseline of people to cover. But I think there's still time when the system is strained. I will say that that's something that we were researching. Not ready to make a move yet, but we were researching potentially outsourcing substitutes to a temp agency, kind of like Kelly Services. Actually, Kelly Services runs a service. Right now, the math isn't working for us on that, but it may be if it becomes a little more persistent problem. So I would say there's times, getting near the end of the year, you can have trouble finding substitutes. But you know, I think that what we may end up doing, if it's cost effective, is perhaps going for more permanent substitutes or interns if we can prove it's cost effective. When I first got here, we had lots and lots of interns, but they were not doing a lot of subbing, and it was not cost effective. Now that we've sort of laid down the law on interns, that does appear to be a cost-effective way out of the box. So we're still researching that, but I would say we do have some strains on our ability to get substitutes on certain days.
Okay. And then my second question is, we get so many questions even at the board table, but then from the general public and from other public officials about who does what their job is, how they do it, et cetera. Do we have job descriptions for all of our staff members?
We do.
Would it be possible to scan them and put them online for people, in a searchable document. So, for example, if they wanted to know what a social worker does versus a guidance counselor.
Well, of course, just because we have them doesn't mean they're necessarily up to date. So my experience with job descriptions is they tend to get revised when there's a big vacancy somewhere,
Exactly.
right? I mean, you
Yes.
know that.
Yeah,
Actually, you were in
yeah.
HR, so you
Yeah.
know that drill.
I know the drill.
So I think if there are some that are of interest, I just can't vouch for whether they're 100% up to date. We have Ann's got a big compilation of job descriptions. It's just that I'd hate to, people look at it and say, this looks out of date and this is antiquated. It's one of those projects that you always want to get to in HR. All the years I was in HR, I always had it on my to-do list. Let's update all the job descriptions. And we all had to go through that once, about 10 years ago, maybe even longer ago, when the Americans with Disabilities Act passed. And everybody had to go through every job description because you had to write it in a certain format. Now I'm really dating myself. It's 20 years ago, isn't it? Yeah. So that's like the last time everybody had to go through this exercise. Let me see what we have. I'm sure we can make them available. And obviously, if there's specific ones people are interested in or board members are interested in, we can make them available.
I just offer that up.
Yeah.
For the ones that you think you keep hearing the repeat, what do they do?
Right.
What do they
Yeah,
do?
that's fair.
If they're up to date.
Right. Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mrs. Brand?
It's clear that whether this budget or any other budget, the drivers are the number of people that we employ. We actually put a student management system that we're starting to roll out in February. Do we anticipate that having any savings? And when I look at staffing, my priority is always going to be, is it going to help us move forward for students and in student achievement? And then, is it a reasonable way to do it? Because to me, we've gone down different roads and they may or may not cost, and to me, that's always my top priority. That's how I look at the value of this. So if we have a student management system, I was hoping that we were going to see efficiencies so that even if we had the same labor, perhaps that same labor was going to be devoted more to educational needs. Do we anticipate that changing?
I don't think that we would expect to see labor savings that would translate, say, into positions immediately from the student management system. However, there are savings in the budget because of the student management system, but they're not in the labor arena. In the tech budget, there are savings. I'll say the range is between $50,000 and $70,000 for tech services,
Right.
for not having to maintain and pay maintenance fees on what I'll call legacy databases. And by consolidating into one fee, the one fee is $50,000 to $70,000. I'll look to Karen and Nancy to validate that. Does that sound about right? That's in the range?
Yeah.
In the range. There may be a slightly higher fee in one of these areas, but one of the reasons we went to the student management system was obviously to provide better services to students and families and teachers and so forth. But the other was because we were paying ongoing costs for a number of existing systems that didn't talk to one another and were antiquated. So we don't have labor costs right now. I don't know if down the road I could predict that there would be savings in labor costs, but there's definitely savings immediately in the tech services line for that.
Will that mean that we won't also have Edline anymore as well?
Correct. There's several that will be gonzo. Some of these STARS, Antares, SCAD, K-12 Alert will be phased out to better model, and Edline, right?
Right.
Yeah, so that's a sampling of it. So each of those, we were paying a separate annual fee to use. And those will be phased out, and in its place, we're paying one annual fee, and the delta on that is significant. So, I mean, it's one of the reasons I think the board really had that last year as something they really wanted to invest in, was because down the road it would save us money, and in fact it is.
That's your question? Other questions from board members? Mrs. Gerber?
Thanks. One of the questions I had was on page 17 here, when you say sizable shift in overall FTEs from elementary to secondary level,
Yes.
but only a slight increase in FTEs. How is that going to work?
Right, how it will work is that we will have, for example, in this budget, fewer elementary teachers and more high school teachers, just to put it in bold letters. That mirrors a shift in enrollment and so forth. So when elementary teachers retire, as an example, we wouldn't replace the first 5 or whatever the number is that we're reducing. It's not likely that elementary teachers would be certified to teach at the high school, so it wouldn't be just the case that you would simply move somebody, right? But at the high school level, we would, obviously these are new positions, so we would post them and people could transfer into them if they were certified and qualified. So you could have a situation, hypothetically, and this plays out in May and June, and this is what the HR department goes through, actually filling the allocated positions. So you would post a high school position that's open. So let's say you added a high school history position. You post that, people in the district can say whether they want to transfer into it or not, and let's just say hypothetically, some really qualified person who's currently teaching 6th grade decides, I've got certification that goes through grade 12 in social studies, always wanted to teach high school, love of my life, the headmasters agree, we move the person in. Now we've got a 6th grade vacancy. That will get posted, and then people can go into that. So it could be an elementary teacher who's certified K to 6 says, I want that one. And then the resulting vacancy that they had doesn't get filled, right? So, but we're also, I mean, that's a hypothetical example. Now, we're also reducing 6th grade teachers, so it probably won't work that way. But this is the annual shuffle of people around. Obviously, we want to give existing staff a chance at any open position, but that's ultimately our choice about whether we want to make that move or not. But it's not the case, for example, that you've got a 1st grade teacher who then we can say, well, you're a 1st grade teacher, so we're going to put you in the high school physics position. That can't work, certification-wise, unless it's a very unusual 1st grade teacher. So that's how it plays out. So I think we budget for what our needs are, and then we rely on the crackerjack HR department to make sure we get the best people in the right places. And I think last spring and in other years, that department's been masterful at doing that. And obviously, the last thing we want to do is to lay somebody off. There's enough turnover at the elementary level. You get leaves of absence. Someone takes a leave of absence, that creates a vacancy, so someone can stay in it. I would not anticipate any layoffs out of this. That's how it plays out. Good? Yeah. Okay.
Other questions on Series 100 personnel? Mrs. Connelly and then Mrs. Brand.
Just one quick question for right now. The social workers, how that staffing has changed, has that affected the whole school climate program and the teams for that? And how that gets administered?
No. And I mean, they're obviously part of it. Editorializing here, I think the biggest impact for the school climate has been more on the school psychologists. And those are staffed out in the buildings and laid out in there. Because particularly at the elementary level, I mean, they're often the point person for it. I think it's probably had a bigger impact. I mean, social workers are part of it. But Andrea gracefully was not requesting an increase in social workers. She would have until she saw me. Right. Yeah.
Mrs. Brand.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about security. There are a couple of personnel that are listed as far as security, but do we anticipate moving forward? Because there's nothing in here. Now, I don't know if we're talking about moving forward, budgeting for personnel that we actually have, or are we going to look at more, are we budgeting in terms someplace in another part of the budget where we're talking about contracts? What I'm looking for is to make sure that if we decide to go down a particular road, we're going to have the funds to do it.
We did not budget any additional security personnel in the operating budget, the Board of Ed operating budget. We are going to be working with the police department, and we are working with the police department to try to come up with a game plan where there might be more school resource officers available as part of the security team, because I think that's where the real bang for the buck is. And that would not be in our budget. That would be in the police budget. But right now, there's no game plan for that. So there's no additional security personnel in the budget, in the Board of Ed budget. You know, as I said the other day, that we are instituting security. You know, this year we're going to spend some money on security this year, and so there's no large increase in security for next year either, because I think that once the police finish their research at every school, that if there need to be infrastructure improvements, I think that is going to be too big to handle in the operating budget. I think we might have to look at that as a capital. But we have to wait for that to play out. It's too early to put money into that.
Mr. Liu.
Quick question on page 58, number 64, business services. You've got part-time printing service. Is that a person or a service?
I think we have one full-time employee who works in the print shop in the main office and a part-timer. So let me just find that page and I'll see if that's reflected there. Where are you? 64.
Oh, page 58. It's
Oh,
64.
50, I'm sorry. That's not an FTE. So that would be, yeah, that's not an FTE. Is that the part-time? That's the part-time person that we bring in an hourly rate to support the printer, right? So that is, it's not an FTE because it's just an hourly part-time person when we get busy in there.
And you said we also have a full-time printer? Where is that in the budget?
Yeah, we have a clerical person who's in the print, who is an FTE. That's in the business services, that 10. That was part of your 10, not your 10.
So that's part of the stuff that you're going to
Part of, yes, exactly. We'll break down that 10 to who's actually in there. That will clear that up. And there's no change in that, you know, year over year. We're not looking to increase it. Yep. Okay.
Mrs. Iacono.
I forgot to ask before. What's a substitute service clerk that handles absent call-in programs?
That's the people that manage our substitute teachers. So
Oh,
we have
okay.
part-time people. So if someone's sick, they call the sub clerk,
Gotcha.
and then they arrange for the substitutes.
Thank you.
Other questions on Series 100 before we move on to benefits? Mrs. Brand.
When, I think this came up last year, so it's a repeat, but again, if we don't ask it here and answer it here, it's going to get asked someplace else. Dr. Title, when we look at your salary as it goes across, but I know what, it goes out in the district, there's another portion. I just don't know where that other portion is in our budget. We pay it out, but I don't know where it is.
Yeah, the annuity portion of my salary is in the pension account,
Okay,
and the cash is in the salary account,
okay,
and then the mileage is in a mileage account.
okay, but thank you.
Don't worry, it all gets captured on the
No, I figured it was, I just
on the
didn't know where it was.
W-2s and printed in the newspaper. So nowhere to hide. Coming out soon.
Mrs. Gerber.
Yeah, on page 17, when you're talking about the paraprofessionals, and so significant decrease as a result of reduction, and that was from last year with the new, the special ed, but then overall paraprofessional positions increased with a shift in funding to grants. I was just wondering if I could get a little bit more information on that.
Andrea will go through that with you.
When we began building the budget, we have, overall, there's a slight increase in overall para staffing. I think it was 4.1 FTE total. That relates to the needs of individual students with significant needs. Coming from the preschool into elementary into middle, there's shifts all over the place, school to school, everywhere. And that was what we needed. When we looked overall at the budget, we felt compelled in this climate with the insurance issues to make some decisions and to reallocate or redistribute how we use our IDEA Part B funds, and decided there are have always been paraprofessionals in that account, but we decided in order to be able to do what was needed overall, that we would take additional paras into the grant account to try to allow for some relief on the board funds to deal with other issues.
Great, thank you. And I just had one other question,
do.
not for Mrs. Leonardi, actually. This is page 50, Business Services, the custodians. I was just wondering, there's the driver custodial, who I assume is the one who drives the van around, and then there's the 8.5 custodians and head custodians. Is that all central off? I wasn't quite sure where they.
No, those aren't all central office.
Okay,
We
yeah, I
have
didn't
one
think so.
cent-
I just wasn't sure where exactly.
I
they
may have
went.
to ask you to hold on that, only because Tom
That's okay.
is over at the
RTM. Yes.
committees on the Osborne Hill project. We had to divide
Right.
and conquer, unless somebody on the staff can give me more details on the custodians. No change there, but what comprises the 8.5 custodians and head custodians?
Okay.
We'll answer that on Thursday.
Great.
So, well, yeah,
Okay,
we'll just
that's fine.
put that on in the parking lot.
Okay, thank
Okay.
you. Thanks.
Good.
And Mrs. Connelly.
Yep.
I'm actually doing this off of the grid that Mrs. Gerber had requested, but in looking at the high school with the 0.25 increase in English, 0.2 in world language, 0.4 in math, 0.25 in science, 0.4 in social studies, I was wondering to any extent, this is getting back to a topic Mr. Carey's brought up in the past of online learning, not as a means of replacing a position, but as a means of avoiding new hires. I was wondering to what degree your office had looked into that.
Well, online learning, we're really beginning to look at that. It's sort of in its infancy, I guess is the best way to put it. There have been a lot of false starts on that, as you're probably aware, over the years. We have research, and we're beginning the research on, sort of put a toe in the water on a program called Plato, which right now we're using in a very limited way. We're using it at the alternative high school. We're using it for homebound instruction. We're using it as a supplement in the workshop classes in math for additional support. We're not ready in any way, shape, or form to roll that out as a credit type of thing. So we're starting on that, but there's been a lot of issues with that, with kids taking courses online and not getting the proper support from the teachers and so forth. So it's on the radar screen. We're pursuing it. It's in the budget as a software program we think has some promise. But right now we're using it in a very limited way. I think we're also using it for kids who are if they were homeschooled and they come back into the district, we want to get a sort of a measure on where they are curriculum-wise. We can use that. So it's more of a supplement right now. There were some, I think, ill-fated attempts, particularly in Connecticut, with, I guess we'll call it virtual high school, where, faculty of the state was actually sponsoring one, and turned out to be not as good a deal as you thought, because you still had to assign a teacher to it. So you still had to soak up a part of an FTE for a teacher to manage the virtual high school. So it wasn't saving you the 0.5 or the 0.25 at all. I'd say we're beginning to look at that, but right now it's very limited. But it's on the radar.
I think Mr. Carey has a follow-up question in that subject area.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up to Ms. Connelly, just to clarify. One of the things I've been an advocate of is not necessarily online learning platforms from outside sources, but creating our own video conferencing capability between the two high schools so that the segments that we have that can't sustain 15 students can be taught by one teacher on either side of the unit. And I think the technology is available to do that. It's a matter of setting it up and training, because it's a different type of teaching, obviously.
It is, and there's a pretty good capital investment in two sites that you'd obviously have to do for that, and the other issue is you've got to have space at both schools to do it, which is a huge issue in both high schools right now. So you really need almost a dedicated room because it's got to be interactive. It can't just be sitting there, passively. We did remove one obstacle to that, which is both high schools are on the same schedule, time-wise, which would be one requirement. But you would need to have sufficient space and capital investment so that you could have multiple people communicating with the teacher and the training and so forth. So I think it's got some potential. Right now, I think we frankly would have a space issue more than anything else, unfortunately.
Is that it on 100 series? Now we're moving on to 200 series, which is the benefits, which start on page 59.
Okay, I think I have some
Any other
questions on that.
questions, hands raised, so we'll move on to page 59. And does Dr. Title have any overall comments that you'd like to make?
Give me a
before we
second.
entertain questions.
We have we got a lot of questions in many different orders on this. Well, the biggest thing in benefits. We've discussed it, and we did provide some additional information.
Social Security.
Yes. So let me talk about pension. I know there was a question about that, and that's a pretty big number. So the Board of Ed is in the pension plan with the town, only for employees who do not qualify for teachers' retirement. So the vast majority of our staff are not in the board in the town pension plan. These would be basically non-certified employees. It's the same plan as the town, and all of the assumptions around the pension plan that the pension board, along with the Board of Finance, deal with, all of those apply equally to the Board of Education as well as to the town. There's no difference. The benefit plans are the same, and all the assumptions are the same. So when the town changes its assumptions or changes the smoothing, number of years to smooth, all of that impacts us as well. Last year, they had an experience study done of the actual use of the pension versus what the pension firm, Hooker and Holcomb, had recommended. And they found that last year, there was a decrease in what could be put into the pension plan, but that there was going to be a one-year increase this year, and then it would start to smooth out again, so that going forward, that we would not have significant and material increases in our pension after this year. So it's a one-year spike, and then it may go up, but it's going to go up much more incrementally, and it has to do with the assumptions and the number of years they smooth the returns on. The basically bottom fell out of the stock market in 08 and 09, and has been rebounding, but obviously not back to where it was. And so as you look back over a period of time, those effects smooth out. So right now, we are, all the assumptions, the earnings assumption, everything is the same for the Board of Ed. I can't forecast it precisely, but what I recall from the last time was that this was going to be the last year of the big jump on pension.
Listen, do you have any other comments that you want to make, or entertain
Well, I think,
questions?
I don't know, did someone have a
It's a
question on pension?
follow-up to
Mrs.
that.
Brand,
That was what I was
follow up on
thinking.
pension.
Yes, please. Considering that it's a very specific group, do we take a look at and forecast what the retirements are going to look like there, just as we do with our teachers, so that, in fact, we can also attempt to ascertain what we're going to be contributing? I know we won't know the
Yeah.
total amount, but we know the
Right.
number of people.
Yeah, I mean, we get retirements in that, in there, periodically. I don't think we've got a great, forecast on that. Actually, we don't have a great forecast on teachers. I mean, we assume a certain number every year, and then we keep our fingers crossed that it actually materializes. But the pension folks, you know, they update it periodically for the board, and they take into account retirements and new hires. And so we don't have any real good projections on retirees in the non-certified area. We do take a, you know, we do believe that it will happen periodically, but it's very unpredictable. Some people will work forever, you know, on it, and they may be working for the benefits, not for the, you know, because none of our retirees have post-retirement health insurance benefits. And so you could be a, you know, paraprofessional here for 40 years, and if you're not eligible for Medicare, you know, when you retire here, you're not on the town's pension plan anymore. So I think we have, you know, a number of people that stay for quite a long time, really because of the benefits. It's not necessarily for the hourly wage.
And did you want to make any comments on the Social Security?
Okay, yeah,
question?
there was a question on Social Security. I may have Doreen to look at this. There was a drop in the Social Security number there. So I asked Doreen to talk about that. I think it's on 59, Doreen.
Well, there were questions on who do we pay Social Security for. Certified teachers and administrators that contribute to TRB, if they were hired prior to April of 1986, we don't pay anything for them. If they were hired after April of 1986, we have to match the 1.45%, the Medicare piece. The other question was on the, so who do we, you know, on the non-certified side, do we pay Social Security? We do, but we also have a FICA alternative program, which came about in 2005. Seasonal hourly employees at the time were given an option to choose FICA or this FICA alternative. They were grandfathered if they chose FICA, but they were required after 2005 to participate in the FICA alternative program, which we don't match. They pay 7.5% pre-tax, and we don't match that. That's who we pay it on.
Right. So then the question is, why would the number go down?
The number went down because the FTEs in the operating budget went down. The only increase was in the grants, and the grants cover their own benefits.
Okay. Thank you. When you say FICA alternative program, can you expand on that a little bit? Are the employees getting a choice to do something other than Medicare?
That is well, they were given the choice in 2005. Now they no longer have a choice if they're seasonal or hourly. They have to participate in the FICA alternative program. And yes, it is an alternate to FICA, to Medicare, or FICA Medicare. They don't participate in Social Security. They're not entitled to that on the hours that we work, you know, that they work for us.
So what is the alternative if they're not going to get Medicare, if that's not funding the Medicare?
It's more of a portable retirement option for them.
Mr. Carey, if I can.
Sure.
It is working now. The gentleman kept telling me to get closer, and I was almost kissing this microphone, and it still wasn't working, so thank you for moving it over. When you say a FICA alternative, is it an alternative to the Social Security side or
Yes.
an alternative to the Medicare side?
Both.
Both. It's an alternative to both.
So I guess my question is, on the Medicare side, what's the alternative? And I'm fascinated by this
On the certified?
No, it would be non-certified.
non-certified. So what's the alternative to Medicare for our employees that's offered? What do they get? Is it an insurance plan? Are they funding something?
These are seasonal hourly employees that don't have insurance
So
anyway.
they're not required to pay into
Right.
Medicare, is what we're saying, because it's an
Right.
hourly. Okay.
Right.
Now I understand. Thank you.
You thought maybe it was something you wanted to look into?
I was fascinated if we could find a program for my private company employees that will actually pay by the time they're 65.
That was the real agenda behind all that questioning.
I suspected, but I wanted to clarify.
Right.
Mr. Convertito, you have a question.
Yeah, I just want to clarify the decrease in the Social Security. That seems to indicate to me that we had a significant number of teachers hired post-1986 that have left. Is that correct?
Well, it could be. I mean, that's not what explains this, though, right?
Mostly shifting.
No,
Right.
it's the change in the positions, really, in salaries,
Right.
in the operating budget.
And did you also say it was a shift of salaries to the grant side? So
Right.
the Social Security will show up on the grant side, not on
Right,
the
and
operating side?
And the positions that moved were non-certified, which are the FICA-type positions.
So am I going to see an offsetting debit on, so in our previous discussion, when we were talking about paras that were shifted to the grant side, I'm
That's-
going to see an offsetting Social Security debit on that side?
This is the reduction in the operating
Right.
budget side. There'll be part of what's being funded in the grants are the benefits associated with those positions.
Okay.
But in the way our budget is structured, will you see a separate line item for that Social Security? Or is it all in one line
In the
budget?
It's in here.
grant section in the front, there'll be line by line. It's not, it just says benefits. It's all
So
benefits.
it just says benefits, not
Right.
FICA particular?
Right.
Mr. Dwyer, and this may or may not be helpful in answering Mr. Convertito's question, but if the members look at page 136, the staff summary, it was clear to me after Ms. Munsell explained, you'll see that the grant FTE subtotal goes up and the grand total goes up fairly significantly, so that money that we're paying to Social Security goes into a different bucket that we're not seeing, if I understand the answer correctly. That number going from 46.45 to 6125 is where we are seeing the diminishment, but that didn't make sense to me that we were increasing FTEs and reducing our Social Security comp. But now I understand it's going into a bucket that we're not seeing directly in the operating budget, if I understand the answer
Correct.
correctly.
Correct.
You're getting a nod. That means you're
So
right.
I'll move on to another question while Mr. Convertito ponders that answer, or do you have a follow-up question? Mr. Convertito?
Not right now.
Not right now, okay. Other questions on benefits? If,
Sorry?
other questions on benefits, Mr. Carey?
Well, the 100-pound elephant in the room, and I have to address this. I do appreciate the fact that Dr. Title got us some statement on the Internal Service Fund, but unfortunately, the statement of the Insurance Fund analysis that we received from the town is a summary as of June 30th, 2012. And our experience started falling off a cliff after that point. For us to make a judgment on the amount of money that our superintendent's looking to fund in this fund, we need to have full visibility to the Internal Service Fund as it stands today. My point being, if the town's experience has been excellent over the last 7 months, while ours is tanked, we might not have to contribute as much to this fund and therefore have as big a request. Conversely, if the town's experience has been as bad as our experience, we might have to be funding more. And as a veteran of a lot of these meetings with the Board of Finance, I explicitly remember then Board of Finance member, now our first selectman, having a very pointed discussion, I think, with Mrs. Brand, Mrs. Iacono, about us not acting as an island or in a vacuum to this fund, which impacts the town's bond rating. Unfortunately, we don't have the knowledge or the information to make an informed decision on this fund because we don't have up-to-date information from the town, which we are entitled to, based on the memorandum of understanding that Mr. Flato put together with Dr. Clark a number of years ago. So I'm going to have to reiterate that we need up-to-date information from the First Selectman's office, and we're going to need it by Thursday, quite frankly. 'Cause I don't know if I can vote on this budget without knowing this information by next Tuesday.
Is there a date certain that you're looking for an up-to-date report as of a certain date so that it's,
Well, it would be my,
we can give them direction?
look, we've got a Aon report here that goes through
I think it's November.
November. My expectation would be that we should have experience from at least November, if not December at this point, and then the Board of Finance will have the benefit of probably another month's experience. What I don't want to see this budget end up having happen to this budget is us getting caught in a 4 to 6 hour discussion with the Board of Finance on the Internal Service Fund because we didn't do our due diligence up front in terms of understanding where the town's position is related to ours, so that we can not just make a judgment on where our position is, but what the whole town's position is.
Mrs. Brand, and then Dr. Title may have a comment on his rationale for choosing the budget number that he recommended.
Yeah, and I think it actually speaks to what Dr. Title, I think, said something earlier regarding this. When we look where we are, which is, I'm hoping to see in our quarterly reports, we get a sense. But it was my understanding that when Dr. Title put this budget together, it was also checking with the town as to what they thought we needed to put in based on their experience. If I recall correctly, Dr. Title said the town side actually had a good experience, which meant there was sufficient funds in the Internal Service Fund so that we could budget accordingly. To me, in terms of our funding, how we're managing it, because it's my understanding if that number, that total number in there starts to go down, then it starts to impact our operating. We can't pay the bill, they can't help us out, then it starts to impact theirs and ours, which clearly we don't want to be in that position. But in terms of our responsibility, as long as we're meeting and covering our own and able to manage it, now thus far we're in the hole, but it's my understanding that the town is financially in a better place and they've been able to cover. We've been in the reverse where we've been covering them. Right now I believe they're recovering us.
Do you have any comments that you want to make, Dr. Title?
Well, I didn't seek approval from the First Selectman or anybody for how to budget it. As you know, we had choices to make, and previously, the town was very interested in keeping our reserve position much higher. And obviously, I'm going forward with the actuarial numbers as presented by Aon, which brings us down to 1 time, which really is probably as low as it can, as it can go. But that meant we would budget the 9.2% national trend as opposed to a lower number if we had kept a higher reserve. They did indicate to me that their position has gotten better, but I don't have numbers to back that up. Your point is, what are the numbers? How much better is it? I just don't know. I can pursue that and see what we can get from them, see if they've got a projection for their own use, but they may be holding, I don't know what their time frame is. Their budget's done at a different time frame. So clearly, if there had been a major objection to my taking this approach, I'm sure they would have told me. But I can't tell you how much better the town is. And as we all know, month to month, this thing can vary. We started going downhill like last January, and it went downhill pretty quickly. So you can look like you're in pretty good shape, and then the thing can tank, or you can look like you're not doing very well, and then you get 3 or 4 good months, and then all of a sudden you've got a nice surplus in there. It's a very volatile account. So I will endeavor to see if I can't get more update information from that office, and see what I can get to you by Tuesday.
Did you have a follow-up? If not, Mr. Convertito? You had a follow-up.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear that it sounds like the town's position is better, but I also, and I appreciate the superintendent reaching out, but this is a situation that can impact all 10,000 students in our school district. I've seen this go south. We took a major hit in 2011, and this was the central point of discussion. So I would ask that the board ask the chair to directly ask the First Selectman to get this done so that our CEO is not caught in the middle of a political gambit. I don't know why we don't have this information right now. The information is available, and I really think it's important, since this is 90+% of our increase, that we get this information as soon as possible, Thursday preferably.
Mr. Convertito, you had a comment.
Yeah, I just want to follow up. The number that you've budgeted is the one times?
Yes.
The IBNR?
Yes.
And in previous years, the town has insisted that we do it 2 times?
Well, last year, we had an informal agreement to do 2 times, which actually was a planned decrease. We were actually, at the time we did the budget last year, we were sitting on more than 2 times.
Right.
This actually saved us money in the budget. And in prior years, I think they really wanted us to try to just, I remember Mr. Flynn saying to me, do no harm. Don't go down, because we're still building up our position, which was Mr. Carey's point. So we tried to maintain that status quo. So it's been a little different each year, to be honest with you. You know, we've been plowed this field a number of times. There was the original MOU that of questionable validity, I guess.
Don't want to go there.
Right, that it said budget a certain way, then there was another one, and back and forth. So we've been a little more informal about it. But I will say this year, they certainly understand why budgeting an even greater amount into there would really be problematic. So,
And you've had those discussions with them? I mean,
Yes.
We can feel safe that they're not going to stand up here in the podium last year begging for a 2 times IBNR?
I can't promise you anything.
But you've had preliminary discussions with them?
Yes, they understand why we're doing it.
Okay.
And
My concern is if their
yeah.
experience rating is not what it should be.
yeah, no,
and
they've
we
had a
have to
good
go
year.
there. I mean,
Yeah.
we're in trouble if we have to go there.
Right. I mean, you know, this is the issue with our doing our budget well before the town.
Okay.
You know, we have to go on less complete information. I mean, last year, we budgeted a certain way with certain assumptions, you know, through November. And then I think by March rolled around, this downturn in the experience was happening. And all of a sudden at a meeting, we heard about, oh my God, the Board of Ed doesn't have enough money in its health insurance fund. And we said, wait a minute, the rules were we budget based on November, and then, you know, if we want to, you know, if you have to adjust it later, you adjust it. So, you know, maybe this year we'll have 3 good months, and we can sit there in March and say, we don't need as much in here. I just don't think we're going to have that information. You know, our defense is we are budgeting it according to the guidelines from our insurance consultants. This is not Dave Title making this up. This is Aon saying the industry standard is you budget 1 times the IBNR, you budget the 9.2% trend. That's how we budgeted it. That's my story. I'm sticking to it. The town has asked us in the past to do a different one, and we tried to accommodate that last year, right? So we're trying to be good soldiers about this. And I think there's a lot of goodwill there with all of this, but do I think there could be somebody who gets up at a public meeting and say, you know, why don't you guys put more in there? Could happen.
Miss Iacono.
Is Mrs. It's all good. The information is out there, apparently, because they know they have good experience, and I really think it would be extremely helpful. There's some kind of back and forth going over here, and I don't know what it is, and I don't know why it's happening. And I think it would be very helpful if the chair would reach out to the first selectman and help us get this information. I don't know why it wasn't given in its full disclosure to the superintendent when he asked for it. I think it's only fair that we have the information. It's there. It's available. I don't understand why the first selectman's office will not produce this information, and I really think at this point it's becoming some kind of strange political football. I don't know why. This is where it always goes, and I really would like the chairman to speak with the first selectman and tell him that we need to make an fully informed decision at this table.
Any other comments? Mrs. Brand.
I guess I'm confused at what we're asking for. If we're asking if there's sufficient funds or a number that's in the account to date, then we're building our budget based on that number right now. The town, though, is not basing their numbers on that because they're not delivering their budget yet, so they have more time, they have a different circumstance than we. So all we have is the information to date. So if I'm not mistaken, doesn't the Board of Finance give a review of an update, and we just get that review and we'll know exactly where they are? Because they have to give it to the Board of Finance. And, in the past, no one's been particularly shy about coming to us if there was a shortage.
The town does have its own budgeting timetable, and so when they produce the report that you're referencing, Mr. Kerry, is probably based on their budgeting timetable, not necessarily our budgeting timetable. That's correct. Mr. Kerry.
I'll try to help answer Mrs. Brand's question from my perspective, and I'll try to help you get off this topic, Mr. Chairman. We'll stay in the same church, but in a different pew. The document that we were provided today, Mrs. Brand, is through June 30th of 2012, yet information is available most definitely through November of 2012, if not December. What I'm requesting is that we have that up-to-date information for both sides of the House, the town, and the Board of Ed Medical, so that we can make an informed decision about the number that the superintendent has given us.
You're looking for a projection on the town side
Looking
that's
for-
similar to what we have in terms of where do they think their year-end position will be
Well,
in June of 2013?
That would
Is
be
it?
helpful, too, but I'd be satisfied with just the actual experience through November or December at this point. So this document is current because the experience problem we had began after June 30th.
Well,
So,
it started before that,
Yeah.
but
well, all right,
And so
I do agree. It started before
Right.
that, but it's become more egregious since then.
So if I can ask, if that document was updated through the end of the year, 12/31...
That'd be very helpful.
That would be helpful to you.
That would be very helpful, exactly. My second, unless Mr.
We
Fadiman
will
has
we will
something to
make
add to
that inquiry.
No, I
Mis-
wonder if another issue related to this matter.
Okay.
Do you want to...
I'll defer to Mr. Fadiman and then ask my
Mr.
other
Fadiman.
question after.
I guess, I'd like to know, that at one time, there was an agreement between the Board of Ed and the First Selectman, I believe, or the town, and that had certain requirements on this particular fund. Is that agreement, in your understanding, has been rescinded, or is that still in effect, or do we know?
Oh, dear.
For the members of the public that...
I was going to not
Like inside baseball
go through
jokes.
this, but if you would like it,
I just
there
wanna
was a
know-
memorandum of agreement signed between the previous superintendent and the previous first selectman at the time there was the time that the board and the town converted from fully insured to self-insured. 2007. So that memorandum laid out several requirements and obligations. One of the requirements was that the Board of Ed would fund based on the, basically, November numbers and the Aon projections, and if the board did that and the fund went low, the town would bail it out. That was one sort of advantageous thing to the board, and one of the reasons for that was that because the board was taking on the risk, I think the superintendent was trying to protect the board. You know, what if we make this conversion, have a horrible year, we have to pony up $1 million we don't have. At the same time, it also allowed for the first selectman to, at his whim, scoop up money in the Board of Ed fund in the event the town had a bad year and the Board of Ed had a good year, a provision that was exercised once and another time was thwarted. So that was the essence of that agreement. Now, there's a kind of legal dispute among people about whether that agreement is still in force. It was signed by people that no longer are here, and should the board have signed it, and so on and so forth. You'd love to argue that one, okay? So that was a substance of that agreement. Then we had the big brouhaha in June of 2011 about how the board was budgeting for health insurance, and there were lots of unpleasantries around that, to put it mildly. That's like the Lincoln second inaugural when he said, and then there was a war. So that's an understatement. see, second inaugurals are on my mind as of yesterday, and it's getting late, so I'm really going off the target. But in essence, fast forwarding, we then attempted to draft a new memorandum to replace that memorandum, and right at that podium came people from the town. Several board members said, we would like you to rescind the old agreement, and then we'll talk about a new agreement. Some people thought we shouldn't have any agreement, and the matter really never got resolved. It disappeared into the ether, and so there is no subsequent agreement. Everything subsequent to that has really been on an informal basis. One could argue whether or not the original agreement is in force or not from a legal perspective, so I'll let you and Mr. Confortito have that out maybe offline sometime so we don't get bogged down. How was that for a brief history of health insurance?
But from a practical point of view, we have relied on the working relationship between Dr. Title, Mr. Tetro, and Mr. Flynn to resolve what they think is a proper budgeting approach. The revised MOU would have documented a 2 times IBNR until the town decided it was in their best interest for us to get down below that. By not having the revised MOU, we actually got relieved of that last year as well as this year, because by the time the town went to budget, we had a couple of more months of bad experience and would have had to put in a different number in order to keep the 2 times IBNR. And the finance board accepted that the gentleman's agreement was, this is what we're going to budget, and so they did not require any change in it. So at the moment, we're relying on the working relationship between those 3 positions to arrive at a number that is an acceptable budgeting number, and which was the basis of Dr. Title's recommendation.
And if you really want to get fun with this, the town's position on this is further complicated by the fact that this is all part of a larger internal service fund that also houses workers' compensation and unemployment insurance, for which the Board of Ed has a major role. And so that was also a complicating factor, because it was not simply a matter of the town's health insurance and the board's health insurance, but the overall health of the whole internal service fund, which was cited in 2010 or sometime as a possible watch area for the credit rating.
And then the third level that it goes up to is the overall strength of the balance sheet of the town, of which this fund is just one piece of the balance sheet, which is a critical measure for bonding and whatnot. So there's a lot of layers of conversation that the town has that impacts their discussion on what is an appropriate budget, and they've agreed on a discussion basis that as long as we follow Aon's professional judgment of 1 times IBNR and the 9.2% trending factor, that we are in a defensible position should a member of the RTM or a member of the Board of Finance ask the question. Our defense is that we are following the consultant's recommendation.
Anybody want to move on to the 300 series?
We have 2 more questions, and then we'll move on.
In essence, are what we're doing, in essence, putting in what we put in last year, plus an additional amount, which is this additional 5.4, which is what Aon recommends. So we're putting in what we did last year, plus what the recommendation from the consultant.
That's correct.
So all right, that's what I want to clarify.
Okay. Mr. Carey.
So we have 9.2%, 1 IBNR. How's the 9.2% is the projected recommendation of Aon. How does that compare to, and I apologize, because I know we probably got this number less than a month ago, but I have the memory of a goldfish. How does that compare to our actual trend right now? Are we trending above 9.2 with our bad experience, or is that in line with our actual results that we have through, I guess, December would be the number we would have? Does that question?
Through November.
November. Are we north
No,
or
well,
south of 9.2?
we trended horribly. I mean, we trended way above it, which is the bad experience, right? Our actual wasn't 9.2. Our actual in the trailing 12 months was like 20, which is what put us in the hole. What they're saying is prospectively going forward, the national trend rate, or the trend in this region, is 9.2, so no, we don't want you to budget 20. They have looked back, and I think we heard them discussing that over the past, 8 years, our trend has been somewhere in the 8s, but that's really splitting hairs at this point.
It is and it isn't, but that leads me to my follow-up question. A couple of years ago, when we had this big discussion, the recommendation was 10.57, even though we were trending in the high 7s, low 8s.
Right.
And we had been receiving 7 figures in good experience back each year. So the argument was, do we continue to load this extra money in up front? And the answer was probably yes, because it'll help us rebuild the fund, because the town side was low and we had the risk, the workers' comp and all the pieces. Does the opposite apply here, though? If we're trending at 20 and they're saying 9, should we be looking to split the middle somewhere in between, because our experience is going the wrong way? In other words, you understand what I'm saying? Are we going to end up upside down again next
Right.
year? Is this going to be a concern that we as board members here, when we sit in front of the Board of Finance, that's great, you're at 9, but you're trending at 20, which means you're really going to be at 14 or 15, and why are you at this number?
Well, I think that Aon has, and we can get this, what the actuals have been over like the last 6 or 7 years. And, the actuals have been a lot closer to 9 than 20, and it's really bounced around. They never really wanted us to go below the national trend. The only reason that they felt okay about us going to 7 for the current year was that our reserve position was committed to being at 2 times the IBNR. And it was on that basis that they said, we can sleep at night letting you budget at 7, because sooner or later this is going to catch up to you. And they were right. It caught up to us all at once. So they're with our reserve position being at 1 time, then they're saying 9.2 is the right number for you. If you were going to keep 2 times, then 7 might be okay.
And so the question to them is how comfortable they are with the 9.2, and whether they think that we should be looking at more than that.
I
mean, that's
I
their
want to find out
recommendation,
after
but-
we vote for this, exactly. Mr. Chair, along these lines, I know you want to move on from benefits. I did ask several questions very late in the day about benefits, which really the administration hasn't had a chance to research, I would suspect. Just as a point of information, would it be possible for them to come back and try to answer those questions at the next meeting?
Absolutely.
If I defer at this point, so we
Yeah.
can continue to
Yeah,
move along.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Mr. Convertito.
Okay, just a few follow-up questions on number 2. Again, on page 19, 205 Social Security Fund, and $95,000. If I look at page 9, and I look at the IDA Part B, I see the increase in paraprofessional staff. If you could just get me the information on how many that is, and there is no benefit line in there, so what is the portion that is benefit and what is the portion that's salary? I assume I'm looking in the right place for that. 5235?
The IDEA account on page 19 is this year's IDEA. I don't do the IDEA budget for next year until late April, early May is when we get our initial funding and write the budget line, which is when I'll write the budget line for those pairs. But I'm anticipating.
It has a proposed line, number in here.
Right, we're proposing a flat fund.
Mr. Convertito?
Don't do
Yeah.
the whole budget document, that's just a total dollar figure for IDEA, until I have those numbers named.
If it's extended conversation, you might want to come to the microphone.
But
Or-
let's have Doreen look at that
Okay.
issue. I think that needs a little research.
Thank you.
Anything else on benefits? Okay, so it's 10 of 10. Oh, we do have another question on benefits.
Section 207. We're adding $50,000 in there for the food services retirement pension. This board has always gone by the basis that the food services is self-funding. And we actually had this discussion earlier in the year, I believe, about the ability of it to self-fund itself. Why would we now switch gears rather than going to a self-funding approach to backfill that $50,000?
they can't afford it.
And what would the cost increase per
I
meal
mean,
be?
that's, I mean,
to
Doreen
fill
can
it?
expand on that, but, go ahead, Doreen.
I think their current, their cost this year is something like $78,000, and they just couldn't sustain that kind of increase.
I mean, the program is, right now, you know, we don't have a lot of good visibility on the finances of the food service program because there were so many changes this year with the change in the meal patterns and the requirements from the, I mean, that you heard about. You know, the issues about the portion size and kids not buying as many meals and so forth. We're not sure that, and I'm not convinced that they can absorb this kind of increase. So I don't know whether we're going to be able to continue to have the food service program contribute as much to it, you know, to its own funding as we do. Right now, it's still absorbing all these other increases, so that's why we put it in there.
And we
Can-
discussed the food
can we
services
get a-
budget in
Can we get a
June, as you
year-to-date
know.
run out on the food services budget before next week?
Let's see, whatever you have, I don't know.
What was the question?
Can we get a year-to-date run out on the food services budget in comparison to the previous year? Thank you.
Answer the question first. Did you want to answer that question?
No, the answer was yes.
Okay, yes. Ms. Iacono.
So in years past, the money that was generated, the profit that was generated for the food service program would cover their pension costs,
Correct.
just to clarify. And now we're thinking that they're at a run rate where they're not going to be able
Right.
to cover their pension costs.
Correct. And there's one other point on that.
Okay.
And that is that we were very aggressive about capturing money out of the food service account. That's actually was one of those audit recommendations.
I remember that.
That we're hitting them up for about $110,000 in utility costs and personnel costs that, you know, it was borderline as whether they could, you know, it's not just pension that we hit them with.
Right.
They've been hit with $110,000 there, and there is a limit, you know, so, you know, that never was part of their program. I mean, that was just a recent, you know, development. So if we didn't do that, you know, maybe they could absorb this pension. But at some point, it's just too much to handle. So anyway, that's,
All right. My follow-up to that then is, with all the growing concern about the number of people that are in our pension program, are we looking at transitioning to a 401 type plan for those types of employees that are in the non-unionized employees that are in the pension program? Are we looking into getting out of that business?
well, I think we're looking at that in the unionized as well, in the
Yes.
contracts.
Yes, but
Right.
are we
Right.
actively pursuing that? Like, have we done a cost-benefit analysis? And
I don't know that we've done that for food service. You know, I know we're looking at it in the other, you know, all the union contracts. It's obviously a key issue, as it is for the town.
right.
Don't know whether that would work for food service or not.
Can we file that into something that we can look
Yep.
into, since we're pursuing that with our unionized employees? I think it's only fair that we pursue it with our non-unionized
Yep.
employees.
Mr. Carey.
Just to jump on Mr. Convertino's question, and Dr. Title, I think, answered it in part. I do recall that we started electricity, custodial. We had been carrying a surplus in our food services budget that approached $900,000 at one point. I know that surplus is in part for capital expenditures in the kitchens, things like that, where it's permissible for us to spend money certain ways because of the National Food Lunch Program, and it's not permissible other. What I would like, if possible, for the administration to build out, outline for us, to piggyback on Mr. Convertito's request, is what is the goal? What are we goaling that surplus to be moving forward? In the past, it's been a pretty big number. It's approached $1 million. I think we wisely used it through the audit request to help reduce some of our operating expenses. The money moves back and forth. If it's not going for electricity here, it's going for the pension there. That's fine, but what are we looking to maintain in terms of the surplus in that account to make sure that we have the cash flow we need to keep that an independent budget? If we can get that number And I understand it's going to fluctuate because we have a lot of uncertainties with the national program and what have you. But if we can get that number as part of the discussion, that would be helpful to me.
Doreen has that, and we do have, on the last page of the budget, 177 gives you the actual for 11-12 for the food service program, and what the cash on hand was, 6/30/2012. And then we have the budgeted number there. That showed the cash on hand at 482. And there's a formula. Doreen will have to get it. There's a certain formula that you're supposed to keep within, and we're really pushing the bottom of that formula now. We used to be way above the top, and we've been draining it for a variety of good reasons.
So we'll get the formula by
Yeah.
Tuesday.
The other part of this, too, is that the pension fund, quite frankly, hasn't been generating the same income level that it has before, so everyone in the town, including us, is compensating for that. So what we were working with years ago, quite frankly, what we had to put in, honestly pales in comparison to what we have to do now.
You look at the 11-12 food service cash over cash, and you can see that we ate into the fund pretty significantly. And you can't keep doing that every year. So it's been self-supporting, sort of. But it's only been self-supporting because there had been a large balance that now has been eaten up. So you got to keep it whole.
So we are at 5 of 10. The board is welcome to continue on to 300, or the board is welcome to say, let's stop here and pick up on Thursday. What is your desire?
Stop.
I have one stop.
You have two stops, Mr. Fenneman.
Put it this way. How about if I ask it on the reverse? Does anybody want to stay here any later? And the answer seems to be no. So we will pick up on the 300 accounts, but again, Thursday's meeting will finish from 300 through the end of the book and then loop back to any benefits, salaries, income, or any question that board members have. Just as a quick note for next Tuesday's meeting, we do have the 3 policies that will be coming up in addition to the budget. Those are the primary business items. Both Mr. Liu and Mr. Kerry were correct in saying that the time to debate policies is both at the first and the second readings. Generally, the board has agreed on the principles behind the policy and have debated what's the best way to express it. It's no doubt that the policy that we're talking about, that there will be a fundamental, perhaps, division in the House on where the individual rights end and where the rights of the larger group for safety and security begin. And that's an issue that we have been debating as a country for the last 15 or 20 years, as we've seen both internal and external terrorism and cyberbullying. And so my purpose of saying let's debate that fundamental philosophical question that probably only has an answer within your own personal self at Tuesday's meeting. If people have a suggestion that they want to make regarding the policy that's brought forward by the policy committee, it would be very helpful to the board if you got that to the board in writing so that they would be able to look at it and we'd have more thoughtful debate on Tuesday. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Mrs. Iacono, Ms. Kennelly, Mrs. Kennelly, all in favor, raise your hand.
Aye.
It's unanimous. We are adjourned.